For 72 seconds, the universe spoke. A perfect signal, 30 times louder than the background noise of space, screamed from the stars, a textbook case for an alien broadcast. Then, silence. It never happened again. What would you do if you were the only one who heard it? If your proof was perfect but unrepeatable? Would you sacrifice your career, your reputation, your entire life for a ghost in the machine? The year is 1977. The night is deep and quiet over the Perkins Observatory in Ohio, the kind of quiet that lets you hear the rustle of cornfields a mile away. But inside the control room for the Big Ear radio telescope, the silence is of a different kind. It is the sound of the cosmos itself, a gentle, ceaseless hiss filtered through miles of wire and amplified into a low hum. This room is a temple to that sound, a cavernous space filled with towering racks of computer equipment. Their blinking lights and spinning tape reels the only movement in the dim light. This is a church of data, and its most devoted priest is Dr. Alistair Finch, at 34, with large glasses that seem to magnify the intensity of his gaze. Alistair is a man built from the same components as the room around him, meticulous, logical, and utterly dedicated to the patient, methodical process of science. He moves with a quiet purpose, checking gauges, calibrating a receiver with the delicate touch of a watchmaker, and making precise, block-lettered notes in a heavy logbook. Every entry is a testament to order, a small brick in the wall of human knowledge he is trying to build. He takes a sip of coffee that went stale hours ago, the bitter taste a familiar part of the ritual. He is engaged in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI. But the work is anything but glamorous. It is a slow, grinding process of elimination. You listen to the endless static of space, you record it, you analyze it, and you prove, day after day, that there is nothing there. You are a cartographer of silence, mapping the vast, empty oceans between stars. There are no dramatic discoveries, no sudden breakthroughs. There is only the hum of the machines, the slow crawl of data, and the comfort of a universe that, so far, has behaved exactly as the laws of physics predicted it would. For Alistair, there is a profound peace in this predictability. It is a world he understands, a world he can measure. The unknown is not something to be feared. It is simply a problem waiting for a large enough data set. And so he waits, and he listens, another night spent staring into the grand, ordered, and blessedly silent void. Hours bleed into one another, marked only by the slow, rhythmic turning of the tape reels. Alistair, fighting off the heavy pull of sleep, is jolted awake by a sound that doesn't belong. The dot matrix printer, usually a docile machine that clatters out a few lines of code every minute, has burst into a frantic, high-speed chatter. It's spitting out a continuous stream of data onto the wide, perforated paper, a cascade of alphanumeric code that is utterly abnormal. He stumbles from his chair, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. He tears the long sheet of paper from the machine. His trained eyes scan the columns, searching for the source of the outburst. He sees what he expects, a sea of low numbers, ones and twos, occasionally rising to a 3 or 4. These are the whispers of background radiation, the baseline noise of the universe. He sees the letters, A through E, representing signals of slightly higher intensity, all normal, all mundane. And then he sees it. In the middle of a column, a sequence explodes off the page, a sudden, violent spike in the data stream. It reads 6EQUJ5. His breath catches in his throat. It's not a gradual rise, it's a vertical line. A 6 is 6 times the background noise. An E is 14 times. A U is 30. It's a signal 30 times louder, 30 times more powerful than the ambient hiss of deep space. It's a shout in a library. He scrambles to the main console, his hands shaking slightly. He checks the telescope's coordinates. It was aimed at a patch of empty space in the constellation Sagittarius, near a globular cluster called M55. No known satellites on that vector. He gets on the phone, his voice tight, confirming no military tests were scheduled, no atmospheric anomalies reported. The signal was clean. It was structured. It arrived on the 1420 MHz frequency, the hydrogen line, a protected slice of the radio spectrum, the cosmic channel that every astronomer agreed would be the perfect place for an interstellar broadcast. He looks back at the printout. He traces the signal's progression through the telescope's field of view. It appeared, grew in intensity as it moved toward the center of the beam, peaked, and then faded as it moved away. A perfect bell curve. It lasted for exactly 72 seconds, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was gone. The printer clattered back to its usual lazy rhythm, spitting out ones and twos. The shout had ended. The universe was silent again. But the rules of Alistair's orderly world had been irrevocably broken. The violation wasn't a ghost story or a vague premonition. It was here, on this piece of paper, in hard, undeniable, alphanumeric code. The next morning, Alistair lays the printout on the cluttered desk of his mentor, Dr. Robert Shaw. Shaw, a man in his 60s with kind eyes that have seen decades of astronomical data, looks at the sheet with the weary skepticism of a man who has seen 1,000 false alarms. He picks it up, his fingers tracing the explosive sequence. "A glitch in the processor?" he asks, his voice gravelly. "I ran diagnostics all night. The machine is clean," Alistair replies, his voice tight with a mixture of exhaustion and manic energy. "Ground interference? A truck on the highway? The frequency is wrong for that. And look at the profile, Bob. It's a perfect Gaussian curve. It tracks with the Earth's rotation, right through the sweet spot of the dish. It came from out there." Shaw falls silent. He puts the paper down and runs a hand through his thinning grey hair. He runs through the mental checklist, the litany of rational explanations that have debunked so many other strange signals. Comets, not at this frequency. A distant quasar, too sharp a profile. A geosynchronous satellite bouncing a signal. Wrong location in the sky, and far too powerful. Alistair has already checked everything, twice. "The hydrogen line," Alistair says, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's the watering hole, the one channel in the universe where we're all supposed to meet for a drink. There was no noise, no interference. It just turned on, and then it turned off. Like someone flipped a switch." Shaw stares at the 6 characters, 6EQUJ5. He looks at the raw, unfiltered power they represent. He looks at the younger man in front of him, his face pale with the enormity of the discovery. The careful, detached skepticism of the scientist begins to crumble, replaced by a sense of profound, terrifying awe. The room is thick with the unspoken implication, the one possibility that no respectable astronomer ever dares to voice aloud. Overwhelmed, his scientific composure shattered by the sheer impossibility of the data before him, Alistair fumbles for a pen on the desk. He finds a red felt tip, and with a hand that is not quite steady, he circles the impossible sequence. Then, in the margin of the printout, in shaky block letters, he scribbles a single, explosive word, the only one that could possibly capture the magnitude of the moment. Wow! That night, the massive, silent dish of the big ear pivots across the sky, a giant ear cupped toward the stars. Back in the control room, the air is electric with anticipation. Alistair and a visibly tense Dr. Shaw have aimed the telescope back at the exact same patch of sky in Sagittarius. If it was a beacon, a lighthouse, it should still be there. If it was a message, perhaps it would be repeated. They sit before the console, listening intently. The speaker, which 12 hours ago had screamed with a signal from another world, now emits only the gentle, empty hiss of the cosmos. The printer sits idle. The tape reels spin, recording nothing but the faint, ghostly whispers of distant, unthinking stars. They listen for an hour, then another. They check the calibration. They run diagnostics. They stare at the monitors displaying nothing but a flat line. There is only static. The voice is gone. The switch had been flipped off. Alistair feels the wild elation of the past day begin to curdle into a cold seed of dread in the pit of his stomach. He has a photograph of a ghost. He has the recording of a single perfect note played in an empty concert hall. He has the proof. But the first and most sacred rule of science is repeatability, and as the empty static whispers from the speakers, he is confronted with a terrifying thought. What if the most important signal in human history can never be found again? Weeks passed. The initial frantic search for a second signal yielded nothing but an endless, mocking hiss of static. The miraculous 72-second recording became a ghost haunting the Big Ear Observatory, an event that was undeniably real but stubbornly refused to happen again. For Alistair Finch, the awe of discovery began to curdle into the grim determination of a man who knew he had to convince a world of skeptics. This brought him here, to a sterile, poorly attended conference room in a mid-range hotel, a place that smelled of stale air conditioning and institutional coffee. He stood at a lectern, the hum of an overhead projector his only accompaniment. On the screen behind him, the stark, beautiful bell curve of the signal was displayed, a perfect mountain rising from a flat plain of data. His audience, a small collection of academics, sat impassively, their faces masks of polite neutrality that barely concealed a deep-seated skepticism. This was the front line in his battle for legitimacy, and it felt like a cold, quiet surrender. His voice, though nervous, was filled with a desperate passion. The signal-to-noise ratio, he explained, pointing a shaky finger at the peak of the curve, is in excess of 30-1. The frequency, 1420.4556 MHz, is a near-perfect match for the neutral hydrogen line. The bandwidth was less than 10 kHz. It exhibited no signs of Doppler shift, meaning its source was not on Earth or in orbit. He laid out the facts, the cold, hard data, each point another piece of evidence for the impossible. He spoke of its sudden appearance, its perfect structure, its abrupt departure. He was presenting a ghost, but he had its fingerprints, its DNA, its photograph. Yet as he looked out at the blank faces, he felt the profound disconnect between his evidence and their belief. He was showing them a miracle, and they were checking their watches, waiting for the coffee break. When he finished, the applause was sparse and obligatory. He asked for questions, and a heavy silence filled the room. Then, a man rose from the back. He was in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket, his silver hair neatly combed. He moved with a calm, unshakable authority. This was Dr. Marcus Thorne, a name that carried immense weight in the world of astrophysics. He didn't approach the microphone, he simply spoke from where he stood, his voice smooth and clear, effortlessly commanding the attention of the entire room. "Dr. Finch," he began, his tone one of paternal patience. "A fascinating data point, truly." He let the faint praise hang in the air before gently tightening the noose. However, as I'm sure we all know, an extraordinary claim requires extraordinary proof. And what you have presented is a single, unrepeated 72-second event. Thorne took a deliberate step forward. Before we leap to conclusions involving interstellar communication, we must, as men of science, exhaust every mundane possibility, no matter how remote. For example, he continued, his voice never rising, have you considered the far more probable explanation of a misidentified terrestrial signal reflecting off a piece of space debris? An untracked fragment from an old satellite, perhaps, tumbling through the telescope's field of view at just the right angle to bounce a distant weather broadcast or military transmission back into your dish. Alistair opened his mouth to object, to explain that the frequency was protected, that the signal was too clean, but Thorne held up a hand, not to silence him, but as a gesture of calm, rational inquiry. "I know. The frequency is a protected band," Thorne preempted, a faint, knowing smile on his lips. "But we are not talking about a direct broadcast. We are talking about a fluke, a 1 in a billion harmonic distortion, an unpredictable bounce, an accident. Science, Dr. Finch, is the study of what is repeatable, what is predictable. It is the business of ruling out the accidents. What you have is an outlier, a beautiful, intriguing, and statistically significant outlier, I will grant you. But without a second data point, it is not evidence. It is noise, an anecdote. Thorne had not attacked him. He had calmly and with surgical precision dissected him. He had taken Alistair's miracle and reclassified it as a mundane error. He offered an explanation that required no new physics, no intelligent aliens, only a lost piece of metal and bad luck. He sat down, leaving Alistair standing at the lectern in a silence that was far more damning than any argument. The presentation was over. That night, the hotel bar was a small island of forced conviviality. Alistair sat alone at a corner table, nursing a drink, the ice cubes melting untouched. Across the room, Dr. Thorne was holding court, a small circle of fellow astronomers, including Dr. Shaw, laughing at one of his anecdotes. For a brief, agonizing moment, Alistair's eyes met his mentor's. Shaw's smile faltered. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement that felt more like an apology, and then quickly turned back to Thorne's charismatic orbit. The message was clear. The lines had been drawn, and Alistair was on the wrong side of them. He was about to leave when a young woman approached his table. She was in her late 20s, with bright, intelligent eyes that held none of the pity or dismissal he'd seen all day. "Dr. Finch, I'm Lena Petrova. I'm a postgraduate at Cornell." Alistair braced himself for another polite dismissal. "I thought your presentation was fascinating," she said, her voice low but certain. "Thorne's reflection theory, it doesn't work." Alistair looked up, stunned. "What?" "The signal-to-noise ratio," she said, leaning forward slightly. "It's impossible for a scattered reflection. To get a signal that clean, that powerful, from a bounce off a small piece of debris, the energy budget is all wrong. Whatever it was a primary source. It was broadcasting. It was a small thing, a single voice in a chorus of doubt. But for Alistair, sitting in the ruins of his professional debut, it was a lifeline, a flicker of validation. He wasn't entirely crazy. Someone else saw it too. The flicker of hope was extinguished the moment he returned to the university. Dr. Shaw was waiting for him in his office, the friendly warmth gone from his face, replaced by a grim pragmatism. He motioned for Alistair to close the door. "Listen to me, Al," Shaw began, his voice low and serious. "I need you to hear this. Marcus Thorne isn't just another astronomer. He is the head of the National Science Foundation Grant Committee. He decides who gets funding and who doesn't. He decides which projects live and which ones die." Shaw leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Alistair's. "Publish the signal, but publish it as an unclassified phenomenon, a curiosity, an interesting puzzle for a future generation to solve. If you keep pushing this extraterrestrial angle, if you go to war with Thorne over this, your career will be over before it has truly begun." The mentor was gone. In his place was a pragmatist, a survivor, delivering a dire warning. "He will bury you, Al. He will dismiss your work, he will deny your grants, and in 5 years, you won't be able to get a job washing beakers in a high school chemistry lab. This is your one chance to walk away from this with your future intact." The conflict was no longer a polite, academic debate. It was a threat. A choice had been laid at his feet, the truth as he knew it, or his entire professional life. Months bled into a cold, frustrating winter. Dr. Shaw's warning echoed in Alistair's mind, but it was no match for the signal that had burned itself into his consciousness. He did not back down. He did not reclassify the event as a mere curiosity. Instead, he doubled his efforts, submitting grant proposals and requests for telescope time with a frantic energy. They were all denied, quietly, politely, and with bureaucratic finality. Thorne's influence was a subtle, invisible poison, closing doors before Alistair could even knock. His small apartment transformed from a living space into a chaotic command center for a war he was losing. The walls, once bare, were now a mosaic of celestial maps, complex calculations, and copies of the original printout. Every surface was littered with textbooks, journals, and a graveyard of empty coffee cups. He had become a man consumed, a hermit in a monastery of his own making. The outside world ceased to exist. There was only the data, the silence from the stars, and the growing static of his own life unraveling. He was on the phone, his voice strained and thin, arguing with a low-level university administrator. I understand that, but this is the third time my request for the big ear has been preempted. Dr. Carlson is looking for pulsars. That's important work, I know, but this... He trailed off, knowing it was useless. To the administrator, he was just another name on a list. To the wider community, he was becoming a problem, a ghost rattling chains in the respectable halls of science. The quest for knowledge, once a noble and orderly pursuit, had devolved into a desperate, obsessive crusade. He was losing himself in the echo of those 72 seconds. His one remaining ally was Lena Petrova. While others saw him as a cautionary tale, she saw a puzzle that hadn't been solved. She believed in the integrity of his data, and she dedicated her own scant free time to helping him search for an explanation, any explanation that could withstand the scientific community's brutal scrutiny. They spent their days in the dusty archives of the university library, a place of forgotten knowledge. They were hunting for ghosts in old academic journals, hoping for a clue. It was Lena who found it, tucked away in a series of obscure Soviet papers from the 1960s. Her Russian was rusty, but she translated the dense text, her excitement growing with each sentence. "Alistair, look at this," she said, her voice a hushed whisper in the library's silence. She pointed to a diagram of a comet. These papers theorize that as large comets pass through a solar system, they can shed massive, invisible clouds of hydrogen gas. These clouds could persist for weeks, even months, trailing behind the comet like a tail. Alistair looked at the equations, his mind racing. "A hydrogen cloud, exactly," Lena continued, her academic passion overriding everything else. Theoretically, if an unknown comet had passed through the Big Ear's observation window at that exact time, its hydrogen cloud could have been stimulated by a background radio source. The energized hydrogen would then radiate at almost precisely 1420 megahertz. She tapped the journal. "It's a long shot, a cosmic bank shot, but it's physically possible. It's an explanation that doesn't involve little green men." There it was, a golden bridge, a perfectly rational, scientifically plausible escape hatch. He could publish this. He could co-author a paper with Lena, presenting the comet cloud as the likely source of the 1977 anomaly. It would be an elegant solution to a nagging mystery. It would show that he was a rigorous scientist, willing to find a terrestrial, or at least non-intelligent, cause. It would appease Thorne. It would save his career. The perfect, career-saving, rational explanation was dangling right in front of him, a lifeline back to the world of respectable science. A few weeks later, Alistair found himself on a stage, sitting on a panel for a public discussion titled Future Frontiers in Astronomy. The moderator was, of course, Dr. Marcus Thorne. Thorne guided the conversation with his usual smooth authority, but Alistair could feel that the entire event was a stage play designed for his benefit. After a discussion on black holes and galactic formation, Thorne turned to the audience, a patronizing smile gracing his lips. And of course, sometimes the frontiers of astronomy are about solving mysteries closer to home. Recently, some brilliant work has been done, re-examining the famous 1977 signal detected by our own Dr. Finch. He gestured towards Alistair. A fascinating new theory involving cometary hydrogen clouds has emerged, providing a plausible, natural explanation for the event. Thorne looked directly at Alistair, his eyes glinting. "It seems we may have a perfectly rational explanation for the anomaly after all. Dr. Finch, it must be a great relief for you, and for all of us, to finally put this particular ghost to rest." The message was unmistakable. It was a public coronation or a public execution. Thorne was offering him one last chance, in front of everyone, to bend the knee. Recant your faith, and you will be welcomed back into the church. This was the moment. The midpoint reversal. Alistair's entire future hung in the balance. He looked at Thorne's smug, confident face. He looked out into the audience and saw Lena. She met his gaze, and in that silent, shared look, he saw her academic excitement about the comet theory, but also her deeper belief in the purity of his original data. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It wasn't a command, but a statement of support, whichever path he chose. Alistair gripped the microphone, his knuckles white. The silence in the lecture hall was absolute. "The comet theory is elegant," he said, his voice shaking but clear, amplified throughout the hall. "It's a clever piece of theoretical work." He paused, taking a breath. "But it doesn't fit the data." A gasp rippled through the audience. Thorne's smile froze on his face. "The signal I recorded had sharp, defined edges," Alistair continued, his voice gaining strength. "It began instantly. It peaked, and it stopped just as abruptly. A diffuse cloud of gas would have a gradual ramp-up and decay as it drifted through the telescope's beam. It would be messy. This was not messy. This was clean. This was structured." He stood up from his chair, his eyes locked on Thorne. "What I recorded wasn't a cloud. It was a broadcast." He had made his choice. A wave of dismissive whispers and shocked murmurs washed over the hall. Thorne's smile had vanished completely, replaced by a cold, hard glare. The offer had been rejected. The bridge had been burned. In that moment, Alistair Finch stopped being a scientist with a controversial theory and became, in the eyes of his peers, a heretic. He had just committed career suicide. The public rejection of the comet theory was not a single explosive event. It was the pulling of a single thread that caused the entire fabric of Alistair Finch's professional life to unravel, slowly and silently, over the next 15 years. The world of astronomy, a community he had once considered his own, moved on. New discoveries were made, new stars were mapped, and the wow signal faded from a controversial anomaly into an academic footnote, a quirky anecdote told to first-year students. 15 years later, the once passionate Dr. Alistair Finch is a tired-looking man in his late 40s, standing before a class of bored teenagers in a drab, sun-faded community college classroom. The fire in his eyes has been replaced by a deep, weary resignation. He lectures on the basics of Newtonian physics with a monotone dispassion, his voice barely rising above the hum of the fluorescent lights. Behind him, on the chalkboard, a student has drawn a crude, cartoonish alien face with large eyes, a silent daily mockery of the event that defined and destroyed his life. His office is no longer at a prestigious university observatory, but is a cramped, windowless room at the end of a long hallway. On the wall, hanging in a simple frame, is the original computer printout of the signal. Its paper has yellowed with age. The red ink of his wow has faded, but it remains. It is not a trophy of discovery anymore. It is a relic, the sole artifact from a former life, a constant reminder of the 72 seconds that cost him everything. The world had moved on, turning his discovery into a joke. But Alistair Finch was trapped in 1977, a scientist forced to teach the basics, while his mind was still lost in the static, listening for the echo of the greatest signal ever recorded. His isolation was nearly absolute. By night, he retreated to his home office, where the pale glow of a CRT monitor cast long shadows on the walls. This was the dawn of the public internet, and Alistair had found a strange, new wilderness to wander in, the bulletin board system, or BBS. He would log into a forum called SETI Enthusiasts, a digital gathering of true believers, conspiracy theorists, and a few lonely souls like himself. Tonight, his fingers flew across the keyboard, typing furiously. He was locked in a familiar, frustrating argument with a user named SaucerGuy77. Saucerguy77 had written, "The 6EQU-J5 signal was obviously a warning from the Pleiadian High Council about the coming planetary alignment. You were the chosen messenger, Dr. Finch." Alistair typed his reply, his jaw tight with frustration. The signal's integrity has nothing to do with Pleiadians. I am talking about the technical merits. The bandwidth was under 10 kHz. The signal-to-noise ratio was extraordinary. These are verifiable facts that point to a technological origin, not a mystical one. The reply from Saucerguy77 came moments later. "Facts are just the vessel for the truth. You need to open your third eye, Doctor." Alistair slammed his hand on the desk. This was his new reality. Exiled from the scientific community that demanded repeatable proof, he was now forced to defend his data from the very people who claimed to believe in it. He was caught in an impossible purgatory, too heretical for the scientists and too scientific for the believers. He was utterly alone, his only companions, the anonymous phantoms on a glowing screen who embraced him for all the wrong reasons. It was this desperation, this deep need for any kind of serious validation that led him to make a terrible mistake. He agreed to be interviewed for a television documentary. The show was called Mysteries Beyond, and he convinced himself that it was a chance, however small, to present his data to a wider audience, to bypass the academic gatekeepers. He found himself sitting in a garishly lit studio, sweating under the hot lights. The host was a slick young man with perfect teeth and an air of profound insincerity. "So, Dr. Finch," the host began, leaning in conspiratorially, "you're alone in this observatory, in the middle of the night. And suddenly, a voice from the cosmos speaks. Do you feel they were speaking directly to you? A cosmic phone call just for you?" Alistair tried to steer the conversation back to firm ground. It wasn't a voice, it was a radio signal characterized by its frequency and its power. "The data, right, the data," the host interrupted, nodding as if listening to a madman's prophecy. "But what did your heart tell you? Did you feel a presence? A sense of being watched?" Alistair spent the next hour patiently, desperately trying to explain the science, the numbers, the beautiful, clean logic of the signal, and the host just smiled and nodded, his eyes alight with the promise of a sensational story. Weeks later, the documentary aired. Alistair sat alone in his living room, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The show began with dramatic, spooky music and blurry stock photos of UFOs. Then, his own face appeared on screen. The editors had taken his careful, reasoned explanations and chopped them into confused, out-of-context sound bites. It was a broadcast, his voice said, followed immediately by a dramatic musical sting and a shot of a supposed alien autopsy. They showed him talking about the signal's power, but intercut it with an interview of a woman who claimed she'd been abducted from her trailer park. They framed him as the central character in a freak show, the lonely scientist who stared into the void for too long and went mad. The narrator's deep voice concluded his segment. A man of science, forever haunted by a ghost in his machine, a whisper from beyond that no one else can hear. He was a caricature, a kook. In that moment, he was publicly stripped of his last shred of credibility. The narrative of superstition had not just challenged his science, it had devoured it, twisted it, and regurgitated it as cheap entertainment. The phone rang, shrill in the silent room. The caller ID showed a name he hadn't seen in years, Lena Petrova, his one true ally, his one remaining link to the man he used to be. He stared at the name, a wave of shame and humiliation washing over him. He couldn't talk to her. He couldn't let her hear how broken he was. With a trembling finger, he pressed the button to silence the call. He sank into his chair, the television flickering in the dark. He had finally hit rock bottom. The scientists had exiled him, and the believers had made him their clown. By rejecting Lena's call, he had now, finally, chosen to be completely and utterly alone with his data. Decades pass. The world changes. The slow, clumsy internet of the 1990s gives way to a new century of seamless global connection. Stars are born and die in the deep cosmos. Reputations are made and broken on Earth. And Dr. Alastair Finch grows old. The humiliation he suffered after the documentary marked not an end, but a turning point. It was a fire that burned away the last of his desperate need for validation, leaving behind something harder, quieter, and more resilient. We find him now in the present day, a man in his 70s. The lines on his face are a roadmap of a long, difficult life, but his eyes, once haunted by obsession and shame, are now clear and calm. He stands at a simple podium in a community hall, giving a guest lecture for a local astronomy club. The audience is small, a mix of curious hobbyists and young students, but they are attentive, leaning forward in their seats. Behind him, projected on a large screen, is the signal, the 6EQUJ5. It looks the same as it did all those years ago, but Alastair presents it differently. His voice is no longer desperate or defensive. He speaks with the patient, measured tone of a historian, calmly recounting the technical specifications, the failed searches for a source, the controversy. He is not trying to convince anyone anymore. He is simply bearing witness. He has moved beyond the need to prove or defend his ghost. He has become its curator, the sole guardian of a pivotal, misunderstood moment in time. And in this role, he has finally found a measure of peace. When he finishes his presentation, he asks for questions. A hand shoots up in the front row. It belongs to a bright-eyed university student, a young woman who looks to be the same age Alastair was when he first sat in the control room of the Big Ear. She stands, her tone deeply respectful. "Dr. Finch," she begins, "you dedicated your entire life to this one data point. It cost you your mainstream career. It opened you to decades of ridicule from both the scientific community and the public. With all due respect," she says, her voice softening, "was it worth it?" The question hangs in the air, simple and profound. It is the one question that has defined his entire existence since that night in 1977. Every closed door, every condescending smile, every lonely night was wrapped up in that single brutal inquiry. The entire story hinges on his answer. Alastair looks at the young woman, and a genuine warm smile spreads across his face. It's a smile free of bitterness or regret. "Worth it?" he repeats softly, the microphone carrying his gentle voice throughout the quiet hall. "That's a fair question." He pauses, gathering his thoughts not as a defendant, but as a philosopher. We think of science as the process of building a map of reality. We draw the coastlines, we chart the mountains, we fill in the blank spaces, and we take great pride in our ever-expanding knowledge. It's a noble endeavor, but it's not the whole story. He leans forward slightly, his eyes connecting with the students. Every once in a while, if you are very, very quiet and very, very lucky, you hear a voice from a place that isn't on the map yet, and a choice presents itself. Most people cover their ears. They dismiss it as noise, as an error in their equipment, as a fluke. They are afraid of the blank space. They rush to explain it away because the unknown is uncomfortable. "The job of a scientist," he continues, his voice filled with a quiet, powerful conviction. "The real job isn't just to fill in the known map. It's to have the courage to stand on the very edge of it, to look out into the vast, uncharted darkness, and to listen. It's to have the humility to acknowledge that which we cannot yet explain." He looks around the room at all the expectant faces. "I spent 72 seconds of my life listening to something truly extraordinary. And I've spent the 48 years since then listening to the silence that followed. And I have come to believe that the silence, that's been the real message. The universe does not owe us answers. It does not owe us explanations or convenient truths that fit neatly into our theories." He looks back at the student, his smile returning. "The universe owes us nothing. But if we are very, very lucky, it grants us a moment of profound and beautiful mystery. And yes," he says, his voice full of a peace that took a lifetime to earn, "it was worth it." Later that night, Alastair is at home in his quiet study. The house is silent, The phone doesn't ring. The world outside is busy with its own affairs. On the wall, illuminated by a single warm lamp, hangs the framed "Wow" printout. It is not an object of obsession anymore. It is not a source of pain or a symbol of a ruined career. He looks at it with a fond, quiet affection, the way one would look at a faded photograph of a long-lost, much-loved friend. There is no confirming signal from the stars. There is no final, validating message. There is only the quiet dignity of a man who heard something once, and who finally learned to find meaning not in the desperate search for an answer, but in the lifelong, beautiful echo of the question. What makes the story of the wow signal so compelling isn't really the question of, are we alone? It's a much more human dilemma. What is the nature of proof itself? On one hand, you have the scientific establishment, embodied by Dr. Thorne. He's not a villain, he's doing his job. Science needs a strong immune system to protect itself from flukes and fantasies, and that immune system is the demand for repeatable results. His skepticism is not just logical, it's necessary. On the other hand, you have Dr. Finch. He's not a mystic, he's a man of data, but his data presented him with a paradox, a single, perfect observation that defied replication. His journey forces us to ask where the line is between rigorous skepticism and a refusal to acknowledge profound mystery. He ultimately chooses to sacrifice his career not for a vague belief, but for the integrity of that one perfect measurement. In the end, he doesn't find his alien broadcast. Instead, he finds peace with the question itself. He learns to value the mystery more than the answer. It's a powerful resolution that celebrates the awe of the unknown over the comfort of the known. So that leaves us with a question. If you were in his shoes, and you had to choose between a comfortable career built on accepted facts and a life of ridicule defending one beautiful, unprovable truth, what choice would you make?